there. Can we talk about Odd Taxi?
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Anthropomorphicism is the attribution of human characteristics or behavior to a god, animal, or object. While, as the definition states, the term can be applied to many things, anthropomorphicism in animals has been around for about as long as human culture has been, with one of the oldest known examples, the Lowenmensch, or Lion Man, of the Holstein saddle being estimated at anywhere from 35,000 to 40,000 years old. While predominant in religions, fables, and folklore worldwide, anthropomorphicism became especially prevalent in children's literature of the West in the 19th century, with many notable examples including Beatrix Potter, Alice in Wonderland, and Winnie the Pooh. And with the rise of film and TV in the 20th century, anthropomorphized animals became more and more commonplace, entertaining millions of children worldwide, and also awakening a lot of complicated feelings among many who would go on to have their own deviant art accounts.
This better not awaken anything in me.
Anime, which in the meantime had become a cultural behemoth of its own, also featured many shows that had anthropomorphic characters. From the dark and intensely horny Beastars, to the whimsical and charming Polar Bear Cafe, to the hysterical and often over-the-top African salaryman, to whatever brand new animal was. So it was not unprecedented when Odd Taxi debuted for the Spring Anime 2021 season, a seemingly low-key show about a walrus named Otokawa who drives a taxi. Or was it?
その名もオッドタクシーだ。
Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Odd Taxi, while superficially appearing as a simple and quirky little show about animals who act like people, quickly reveals its layers and what a creative, unique, and oddly gut-wrenchingly relatable show it is, with its influences not just from its fellow anime predecessors, but from Western media influences as well, taking us on a delightful and often shockingly intense ride until spectacularly crashing into one of the rawest and heartfelt conclusions I've seen in anime in a long time. Odd Taxi is not your typical sad animal cartoon show, and it's not even your typical anime at times as well. A lot of people have been singing the praises of Odd Taxi, what makes it so good, and why it's worth watching, and I decided that it's my turn to tell you all what I personally love about Odd Taxi, and what makes this show resonate so much with me. Bitches be talking about Odd Taxi. It's me. I'm Bitchz. While anime in Japan tends to have a fairly broad viewership and can range from whimsical family shows to violent pornographic cartoons from Japan to nuanced and adult-oriented features, it's taken the West a little longer to catch up on the idea that cartoons don't always need to be either for children or exclusively feature rowdy adult humor. BoJack Horseman and Toucan Birdie are good examples of adult-oriented shows with animals featuring humor and creativity, but also are heavily focused on addressing mental illness and other more adult-oriented themes.
Sad Walrus Show.
The earliest vibes one gets from the start of Odd Taxi is not hyper and bombastic humor, but a rather nuanced look at society. Odd Taxi intensely gives us an unflinching look at the corrupt police state, the highly competitive and borderline abusive idol industry, and the self-destructive spiral that escapism into pay-to-play games can cause, all while speckling in bits of quirky humor, banter, and an intense discussion on who the strongest performance in the hit 1985 single We Are the World was.
Bruce Springsteen.
Despite this, the main focus is on Sad Walrus Man Otokawa, a man with insomnia and other undisclosed mental illnesses, whose job as a taxi driver unintentionally causes him to get caught up in a potential heist, a viral sensation, a missing high school girl, and multiple shady individuals vying for his dashcam that might have critical information on it regarding her disappearance. With BoJack Horseman, despite the antics of the other characters in the world, the focus on the show is often about bad feelings, about BoJack himself and how his unhappy childhood and substance abuse has led him to fall over and over again back into self-absorbed, toxic, and harmful behaviors. Love him or hate him, this is BoJack's story. As much as I enjoyed watching BoJack Horseman, there's a certain self-indulgence in watching a sad show about sad people be self-destructive, 'cause isn't that all of us? Odd Taxi takes place in a far more selfish world, where the series itself is just far too busy to care about your own issues. For all his childhood trauma at being abandoned by his parents, his fears at being submerged in water, his hard time talking to women, and his own isolation, Otokawa still has to wake up every day and drive a taxi around. As opposed to BoJack, who literally had an entire episode once devoted to his internal monologue, most of what we learn about Otokawa comes from external exposition with the characters he interacts with. The moments where a scene focuses on him alone appear almost voyeuristic, especially as he converses with an unknown person who may or may not be inhabiting his closet. We're not offered a lot of alone time and self-reflection of Otokawa. Most of what we learn about him is from the interactions he has with other people who have their own shit to deal with. Odd Taxi enjoys introducing cute animal-themed characters with odd little quirks, but also spends a lot of time making the majority of the characters complex with their own likable characteristics, who are also inherently flawed. One of my favorite characters turned out to be Dobu, a gelato baboon who is introduced as a violent hooligan. We are frequently shown his vicious and manipulative side, learn that he was abusive to his ex-girlfriend and is still extorting her for money. But Dobu is also charismatic and has a huge amount of thoughtfulness and insight to him, despite his cruel and cutthroat nature. And isn't that everyone's personal experience? That someone nasty and abusive can also have a lot of things about them people like, even people they've personally harmed. Objectively, there are many key details that make Odd Taxi a very Japanese show in terms of its culture. Details such as pop idol handshake events, manzai comedy, and rakugo. Or the show's realistic portrayal of the Yakuza, who, opposed to the Western audience's glamorous idea of them, are represented more realistically, not as criminal masterminds, but thugs engaging in scams, robberies, and petty theft. Even the fact that gun violence in Japan is so rare that a single gun going missing is enough to make every character extremely worried for their own safety, as opposed to anyone watching Odd Taxi who is a resident of the United States. Are not really things you easily get unless you're familiar with Japanese culture, either through the cultural osmosis that comes with watching anime or having spent time in the country itself. And yet, so much of Odd Taxi's story is clearly influenced by the films of Hollywood. I've heard a lot of people who are trying to pitch Odd Taxi call it Tarantino-esque, and while I applaud their love of Odd Taxi and their desire to get more people to watch it, these people are wrong. Quentin Tarantino movies are known for ultra hyper-stylized violence, blaring soundtracks, and almost childlike indulgence for the world they take place in. And of course, tons of homages to the films he personally enjoys. But saying Odd Taxi is like a Tarantino movie is like watching Demon Slayer and saying it's like Avatar: The Last Airbender. The reason everyone is saying Odd Taxi is like Tarantino is because one of Tarantino's biggest influences were the films of New Hollywood, a term coined in regard to a wave of up-and-coming filmmakers from the late 60s into the early 80s, making films of a stronger emphasis on violence, drugs, and sexuality, now that the Hays Code was dead and buried, and also featured stories that focus more strongly on current social issues. And one of the most iconic films of New Hollywood was Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, a story about a taxi driver with insomnia and PTSD working in a large urban city who gets caught up in some shady people and gets involved in some shady things. But recently there's been a big pushback to watching Scorsese movies because some douchey guy you knew in college liked them. And Scorsese is a fucking king and he doesn't give a fuck about Marvel movies, so no one has actually watched Taxi Driver. And their only point of reference is Tarantino because he makes the movies about the crime.
I saw this in a movie about a bus that had to speed around the city, keeping its speed over 50. And if its speed dropped, it would explode. I think it was called The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down.
My friend and talented Kazuha Steph, who's also helping me with the script and drew this drawing of me and her in the Odd Taxi-verse, pointed out that if Odd Taxi is to be compared with any contemporary director, it would be the Coen brothers, whose films are known for eccentric characters, absurd crime plots, and a mashup of genres. Two big movies of theirs that come to mind in regard to Odd Taxi are No Country for Old Men and Burn After Reading, specifically because both movies involve separate groups of characters that are all related somehow. Tone-wise, both these movies are polar opposites of each other, with the former being a very dark, very violent film, and the latter being an offbeat dark comedy about very stupid people. And Odd Taxi manages to channel both of these tones without ever falling into tonal dissonance. The late Roger Ebert said, "The Coens get their laughs through a close observation of human nature," a description that is fitting for Odd Taxi, despite the fact that this entire world is composed of anthropomorphicized animals. There's almost a cathartic delight as the series showcases other characters, their motives, their struggles, and we get little glimpses into their world, their relationship to Otokawa, either knowingly or unknowingly, and by those final 2 episodes, you're on bated breath, watching to see how all of it is going to come together and violently crash into one another. Okay, so here's the fun part where I spoil all of Odd Taxi for you. So if you have not watched Odd Taxi and you do not wish to be spoiled, please skip to the timestamp featured on here. There's a key detail I've been very intentionally leaving out. And it's that something is always a little off about this cute, quirky animal world. Non-anthropomorphized animals are kept as pets and show up in video games. Otokawa often refers to the people in his life as animals, only to be met with a good-natured laugh. And as the show progresses, it starts to become more and more implied that maybe this world of anthropomorphized animals isn't real, and maybe it's something only Otokawa is seeing. Like all people who are terminally online, I didn't have what I would call a healthy childhood. I struggled to make friends, and I grew up in a broken home. While on the spectrum, I wasn't officially diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder until my preteen years, and was met with condescension from all non-parental authority figures in my life. All my social faux pauses held under an intense and unforgiving scrutiny. Friendships continued to be impossible to make. I was told not to bother applying for college due to my struggles in classes and my poor social skills. Much of this upbringing led to many toxic and unhealthy coping mechanisms I still struggle to get under control to this day. I still have intense anxiety about making friendships or letting people know who I am. So in my youth, my big escape was animals. Animals were cool, they didn't judge me, and for me, with my big colorful books written about them and fun facts found on the inside of Snapple caps, animals were just easier to understand and navigate than the complex and often unforgiving world of human interactions. And I don't tell you any of this to make me come across as special in regards to this experience, because the story I just told you is so commonplace across people who have come from toxic and broken homes and unhappy childhoods. And this includes the protagonist of Odd Taxi, Otokawa. In the final episode, we learn his own traumatic upbringing led him to escape and form bonds with the animals he saw at the zoo. And a brain injury exacerbated this, making him see everyone in his life as a literal animal. For anyone watching the show, this plot twist was heavily speculated on, and most viewers saw it coming, which doesn't mean it's a bad show or bad storytelling. Plot twists don't need to come out of nowhere and blindside people to make for a good story. It's perfectly fine and good writing to hint and foreshadow at plot twists. But I still get emotional at the reveal because, as I mentioned, there is something so relatable to being so alone and isolated in life that you would escape into a world where everyone was an easy-to-understand animal. This also makes perfect sense that Otokawa saw the Diamond Brother cops as meerkats. Real peeps who hang out at the zoo know.
They are, no exaggeration, the most homicidal mammals on the planet that aren't humans. If a zoo announces the death of one of their meerkats and they say it was due to natural causes, it's way more likely that one just straight up murdered another.
As the mystery of the murdered girl is wrapped up along with key loose ends of the show, we see Otokawa start to resume his life. Not 100% better, but now able to talk to his human counterparts with greater ease. We also see many of the characters whose lives were suffering attempt to recover from this. Cartoon shows aimed at an older audience that talk about mental illness are not uncommon now. After all, there's been a lot of stuff happening in the world that has made us sad, and many of us take cathartic self-indulgence in seeing a show focus on sad people and how they act when they're sad. What stuck out for me with Odd Taxi was how matter-of-fact the mental illness and melancholy and fixation on getting any little drop of dopamine in a hyper-commodified and capitalist society is all handled. While we are given insight into these characters and their troubles, it feels like the world they live in has no time for a little bit of healing and self-reflection. I feel that every day. We all just lived through a pandemic that killed over 500,000 people in the United States. And now everyone wants us to go back to work, and I still got to pay bills and work a job with no health insurance, and it won't give me sick days. Wow, we didn't learn anything. At least I'm vaccinated, so society is safe again.
For you.
I don't think Odd Taxi is trying to say just deal with your own issues. It's a show I found to be incredibly thoughtful and empathetic, even with the struggles of the worst people. But I do think Odd Taxi has a lot to say about how one copes with living in a society, and how sometimes you just gotta get up and get through the day, regardless of your own mental health. Because while there are people out there who do care about you, some people just got their own shit going on too. Which distances Odd Taxi from its Western animation counterparts and puts it more in line with, say, Evangelion. Odd Taxi could have been very easily overlooked, but its Western-inspired narrative and relatable themes quickly gained it a level of attention it deserved. and it's very much worth watching, especially if you enjoy shows that talk about mental illness in a way that feels a little more ingrained into the story, as opposed to taking big pauses for everyone to say how they're feeling. And not to say more reflective stories can't be affirming, but there can be something positive to be taken away from a show that says that the world keeps going on, regardless of these very real feelings, and how sometimes we just all gotta wake up and drive that taxi. That's all for today. Thanks for letting me talk about Odd Taxi. Hi everyone, thanks again for watching this video. Along with huge thanks to Saji for being my script supervisor and Steph for doing this amazing fan art. I would like to thank all my wonderful patrons who help make these videos possible, including my big spender patron, Kurt Schiller, who requested I say, Totoro says seize the means. If you'd like a chance to have your messages read out loud and would like to have early access to my videos and your name in the credits of these fine folks, along with cute animal photos monthly, why not consider becoming a patron for as low as $2 a month? You can also make a one-time donation by buying me a coffee, links in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and share as well. Thank you so much for everyone's wonderful support. It means the world to me. Stay safe out there, get vaccinated, and I'll be back soon with a new video. Bye y'all. Peace.